It started with a crash, a catastrophic system failure, in one of the country's most powerful tech firms during a live investor demonstration. Millions vanished in seconds, reputations shattered, and the company spiraled into chaos. Panic erupted at the top, fingers pointed downward, and blame settled fast, on the lowest rung, on someone who didn't belong, someone whose name no one in the executive circle ever cared to learn. She wore janitor's gloves, walked quietly behind glass walls she wasn't allowed to touch, and bore the weight of silence like armor. But buried beneath that silence was a mind sharper than every engineer in the building, a mind that had already solved the problem, while those who mocked her clung to power they didn't deserve. She didn't come from a legacy family or an elite internship. She came from a lineage that had been overlooked, underestimated, and pushed to the margins. And she was black in a place that only pretended to care about equity. What happens when the person you thought didn't matter ends up being the only one who can save you? Stick around, because this story will challenge everything you thought you knew about status, brilliance, and justice. Make sure to like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. What would you do if the janitor's daughter turned out to be the smartest person in the room? Martin Kelled's shoes clicked like a metronome against the marble floors of Halcyon Dynamics' 35th floor. The office was pristine, sleek, a temple to wealth and innovation, with high ceilings, glass walls, and cold air humming from invisible vents. Kelled thrived in this place not because of what it represented, but because of what it confirmed, that he'd won. The world bowed to his swagger. People moved out of his way instinctively. He didn't demand respect, he absorbed it. The kind that came not from wisdom, but power. He paused just outside the glass-walled operations room, eyeing the wall of monitors tracking server loads, heat maps, and code. At the center of it all stood Laurent Massey, Halcyon's most seasoned systems analyst. Laurent, composed, serious, stood tall despite the sweat at his brow. His eyes scanned logs, firing rapid red pings across the security dashboard. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. As Kelled entered, Laurent turned. "Sir, we've got a problem. External pings, encrypted packets. They're masking as system diagnostics. I think it's a breach vector." Kelled didn't even pause. He walked right past Laurent and over to the central console, where a developer was rendering the final investor presentation. "Of course it's a problem, Massey. It's always a problem with you," he said, then looked up with a smirk. "Last month it was DNS vulnerabilities. Before that, predictive malware chatter. You ever think about relaxing?" Laurent stepped forward, tapping a blinking command on his screen. "This isn't guesswork. If we go live with the node-wide connection enabled, we're essentially throwing open our data center to anonymous admin-level access." Kelled slowly turned, arms crossed. How poetic. But you see, our investors aren't here for cybersecurity bedtime stories. They're here to see our new platform live. Spinning globe, real-time analytics, and me standing in front of it all looking like the man who'll triple their money. Laurent held firm. "This is a real threat. I strongly advise we delay the demo until the shell traffic is neutralized." Kelled leaned in, his voice low and sharp. "You're our scholarship superstar, right? First-gen Ivy, recruited straight out of Yale. You've got the perfect resume, polished. But I didn't bring you here to freeze the company every time the logs blink. It's a presentation, not DEF CON." Laurent opened his mouth to argue again, but Kelled cut him off. "Unless you're telling me the whole building is going to implode in the next 10 minutes, I suggest you get with the program and stop overthinking. Run the demo. Show the pretty colors. Secure it later." With that, he walked out of the room, not even waiting for a response. The room fell into a suffocating silence. One of the interns gave Laurent a nervous shrug. Another buried his face in the console. Laurent, heart pounding, swallowed his protest. He'd warned them. Now, all he could do was wait. 10 minutes later, the executive boardroom was full. 17 top-tier investors and venture partners from New York, Tokyo, and London sat around the matte black oval table. The lights dimmed as a massive screen flickered to life. A three-dimensional rendering of Halcyon's platform swirled to the sound of synthesized chimes. Charts, graphs, and nodes pulsed in rhythm. Kellett took center stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said smoothly, "what you're about to witness isn't just innovation. It's transformation. Halcyon Velocity is the future of scalable enterprise computing, real-time, global, intuitive." Applause echoed. The presentation shifted, simulating simultaneous global logins. Data rolled across continents. A heat map flared in response to load balancing. 6-second latency. Seamless load transfer. No bottlenecks. "This is the power of re-engineered infrastructure," Kellett boasted. Then it happened. A flicker. Then another. The visuals stuttered like a scratched record. One investor leaned forward. "Is that part of the effect?" Kellett turned toward the screen, forcing a smile. "Just recalibrating." But recalibration never came. The screen blacked out entirely. Alarms sounded softly from the hallway. An eerie silence fell over the room. Then, behind the wall, server racks began to blink in erratic red flashes. Back in the operations room, Laurent was staring at cascading lines of code. Every firewall was down. Every node was compromised. He tried to issue a lockdown command. Nothing responded. The attackers had full root access. The servers were being overwritten in real time. Files disappeared in blocks. Commands were rewritten. User logs erased. It wasn't a crash. It was a surgical obliteration. Martin Kellett burst into the operations room. "What the hell's going on?" he screamed. "You fried the demo in front of $30 billion in capital." Laurent, stunned but calm, replied, "This was the breach I warned you about. They used our launch signal as the gateway. I can isolate the node, but you'll need to shut up." Kellett roared. He snatched the badge off Laurent's lanyard. "Security." 2 guards came in seconds later. "Escort Mr. Massey off the premises. Effective immediately." "Sir, I'm the only one who understands what's happening," Laurent said, voice firm but desperate. "I can stop this before you already stopped this company's credibility," Kellett snapped. "Walk." As Laurent was marched past a row of silent engineers, Martin followed, sneering just loud enough for everyone to hear. Everyone knew something seismic had happened, but no one wanted to say it out loud. Laurent Massey's name drifted through the halls like smoke. His absence screamed louder than any alarm. He had become the scapegoat, the symbol of failure, the man who dared to speak the truth and was punished for it. The operations team had been instructed not to speak to the media. They had also been instructed, indirectly but firmly, not to speak about Laurent at all. In the executive lounge on the 24th floor, just off the break room where the upper-tier staff had their own espresso machine and leather chairs, Martin Kellett paced while addressing a tight cluster of executives. "We can't have this bleeding into investor relations," Martin said, adjusting the cuff of his freshly pressed suit. "We lost 40% confidence in under an hour. One man caused that." He wasn't shouting, but his voice cut sharp, a dagger of authority in every word. Standing nearby, Charlene Dunn, Vice President of Strategic Programs, nodded. "The story we push internally," she said, sipping her coffee, "is that Massey was flagged for procedural negligence, that he bypassed the chain of command and acted unilaterally, that he panicked. Emotion over logic. It fits." Martin smirked. "Of course it fits. That's why we hired him in the first place, isn't it? Equity numbers, scholarships, mentorship talking points. Great for headlines, not so great when it counts." Another executive chuckled. "Knew that whole black excellence thing would bite us eventually." Laughter bubbled around the room, low and cruel. No one noticed that their voices carried through the open door, and no one cared. Martin turned to one of the assistants. "Is security ready?" The assistant nodded. "Yes, sir." Massey was asked to retrieve personal belongings. "He's in the second-floor break room now." "Perfect," Martin said, straightening his tie. "Let's make sure everyone sees what happens when mediocrity masquerades as merit." 2 floors down, Laurent sat at a plastic table, sipping lukewarm coffee from a paper cup, staring at the floor. His badge, still clipped to his belt, felt like a weight pulling him downward. His duffel bag sat half-zipped beside him. There were no goodbyes, no words of support, no signs of resistance from coworkers he'd spent 3 years mentoring, coding beside, eating lunch with. No one came. The moment he stepped into that break room, he ceased to exist in their professional world. When the glass doors slid open, security officers stepped inside, flanking 2 men in suits and 1 woman with a tablet. The woman HR's director, with a soft face and eyes that didn't quite meet his, spoke first. "Mr. Massey," she said, tone practiced, "you're being formally terminated effective immediately due to gross negligence and operational compromise." Laurent didn't stand. He didn't react. He just watched her lips move and heard her words like underwater echoes. "You'll be escorted from the building. Your access has been revoked. Any personal items from your workstation will be mailed." Another officer approached. "Sir, I need your badge." Laurent unclipped it without argument and handed it over. The officer took it and, with a dramatic flourish, snapped it in half. One of the junior marketing analysts sitting nearby let out a soft chuckle. A sales manager across the room pulled out her phone and started recording, hiding the screen behind her coffee cup. Laurent stood slowly, lifting his duffel bag. His movements were calm, measured, but every eye in the room bore down on him. Some pitied him. Some enjoyed it. Most were just relieved it wasn't them. As he was let out, Martin Kelled stepped through the doorway with theatrical timing. "There he is," Martin said, voice rising just enough to ensure the whole room could hear. "Our diversity golden boy." A few execs nearby chuckled again. Martin's eyes didn't leave Laurent's. "I knew this equity hiring would cost us someday. You proved the theory, Massey." Laurent's lips pressed into a hard line, but he said nothing. He didn't look away. He didn't respond. He walked. That hallway stretched long and slow. More employees gathered silently by the walls, pretending to sip coffee or glance at phones. They were watching a ceremony. The fall of a man who told the truth too soon. His former colleagues, his peers, now stood like spectators at a funeral, their silence more damning than any insult. Every step he took reminded him that brilliance was never enough. Not when it came in black skin. Not when it threatened the egos of men who valued obedience over integrity. As the security team guided him into the elevator, the glass doors closed with a quiet hiss. Inside, he exhaled slowly, his hand clutching the strap of his duffel like a lifeline. The officers said nothing. The HR director stared straight ahead. Laurent stared at his reflection in the mirrored wall. He looked the same. Same face. Same sharp eyes, same methodical calm, but everything had changed. The betrayal burned hotter than the failure itself. He had given them everything: early mornings, overnight patches, system stability no one else could maintain. He warned them with evidence, not instinct. He brought proof and was discarded like a misfired email. The elevator opened to the main lobby. He walked past reception without so much as a glance. The receptionist avoided eye contact. Outside, the bright sun hit him square in the face. He squinted. The world looked too normal for how broken he felt. Across the street, cars moved, horns honked, pedestrians scrolled their phones. Life didn't stop for injustice. It never had. As the doors closed behind him, the Halcyon Tower loomed overhead, polished glass gleaming like armor. A fortress built on silence, lies, and men like Martin Kelled. Word traveled fast. Attendance was mandatory. Across the building, white-collar employees scrambled down corridors, gripping notepads, laptops, and overpriced coffee as they filed into the gray auditorium. The room filled quickly, but the air was noticeably off, dry, cautious, laced with whispers. Everyone knew it wasn't really about strategy. It was about control. It was about fallout. It was about Laurent Massey, the man whose name had become taboo in less than 24 hours. The room's lights dimmed at exactly 9 a.m. Charlene Dunn stepped onto the stage wearing a crimson pantsuit that screamed authority. Her silver hair neatly pinned, didn't move as she leaned into the microphone with her usual poise. Her smile was thin, precise, and entirely devoid of warmth. "Good morning," she began, her voice smooth but hard. "As you all know, yesterday Halcyon Dynamics. experienced an unprecedented systems failure during our investor presentation. We've conducted a preliminary internal review, and while the full assessment is ongoing, we've identified that certain process breakdowns, particularly those stemming from rapid placed hires and experimental staffing models, contributed to the instability. Her words slid over the room like ice water. No names were mentioned, no fingers were pointed, but everyone heard it loud and clear. Experimental staffing models meant non-white hires. Rapid placed meant diversity recruitment. And process breakdowns meant Laurent Massey. Charlene continued, "In our pursuit of innovation and growth, we deviated slightly from our traditional vetting and integration protocols. While well-intentioned, some of these non-traditional hiring initiatives did not yield the strategic returns we expected." She paused, letting the phrase, "did not yield returns" hang in the air like a noose. In light of these revelations, she pressed on, "We are taking corrective measures across all departments to realign our operational core with Halcyon's legacy of excellence." Behind her, a digital chart lit up, displaying a color-coded breakdown of team realignments. Most employees didn't need a chart to understand what was coming. They felt it in their bones. On the far left side of the room, Jamal Carter, a black front-end developer in the UX division, stared at the screen with his jaw clenched. Just 2 months ago, he'd received a company-wide shout-out for building the new mobile UI framework. Today, his name appeared under a new division, Tier 2 End-User Support. Next to him, Alyssa Green, a systems QA lead known for her ironclad testing protocols, blinked in confusion. Her profile was now tied to internal onboarding documentation team, a role that hadn't existed until this morning. Across the room, several others, all black, all previously in high-skill core infrastructure roles, saw similar reassignments. It wasn't subtle. It was surgical. Silent demotions. None were fired outright. No one said, "You're out." Instead, their talents were buried under layers of make-work projects, their authority erased with a stroke of Charlene's stylus. Charlene continued to speak, but most of the room had stopped listening. Instead, they sat in that gray silence, watching her mouth move, hearing only the brutal rhythm of a hierarchy reasserting itself. After the meeting, floor managers returned to their departments with carefully crafted emails explaining internal shifts, team consolidations, and cross-training opportunities. No mention was made of race or Laurent or the breach, only a quiet understanding that things had changed. On the 11th floor, Jamal sat at his new desk, a corner cubicle facing the stairwell. His monitor had already been reconfigured for Tier 2 ticket intake. His admin rights were stripped. He no longer had access to the dashboard he helped design. A sticky note with a password written in blue ink was left on his keyboard like a welcome gift from exile. He stared at it for 10 long seconds before removing it and slipping it into his drawer. A few steps away, Alyssa was setting up in a temporary bullpen near the janitor's supply closet. The printer rattled every 5 minutes. Her new manager, a junior hire named Trevor, explained her role with unnecessary patience. "Basically, we'll need you to do formatting for internal FAQs and compile version histories. Oh, and color code the new employee welcome guides." Alyssa, who once led simulations for server stress loads, nodded without a word. She understood. That's what the entire day became, a sequence of silent understandings. No one objected aloud. No one protested, because everyone knew the penalty for questioning the hierarchy. Laurent had tried. Look where it got him. Across the office, black employees who'd once been central to Halcyon's daily engine now found themselves on the fringe, technically still employed, but functionally erased. A few colleagues offered awkward glances. One woman passed Alyssa and whispered, "I'm sorry," under her breath. But sympathy couldn't restore status. It couldn't undo what had been done. That afternoon, Charlene released a company-wide statement titled Course Correction and Strategic Realignment. It included a paragraph extolling Halcyon's continued commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, a screenshot of smiling interns from last year's company picnic, and 3 bullet points highlighting new leadership mentorship initiatives. The hypocrisy wasn't just galling, It was nauseating. By sunset, Slack messages among employees had shifted from shock to resignation. The shift was palpable in every hallway, every elevator ride, every exchanged glance between those who remained in technical roles and those silently demoted. Beneath the polished surfaces of the corporate floors, resentment brewed, deep and still. Vernon West, the night janitor, had seen it all before. In 27 years working overnight shifts in the city's tallest towers, he'd watched companies rise and fall, good people shoved aside by bad politics. But what unsettled him most was how quickly a place could go from civilized to cruel. He kept his head down, mop bucket ready, earphones always dangling but never playing anything. It helped him hear the whispers. On this particular day, Vernon clocked in earlier than usual. His manager had texted him about an internal cleaning protocol change, Visibility Day, they called it, where janitorial presence was expected earlier and more frequently to maintain a positive cleanliness perception, following the investor fallout. Vernon didn't ask questions. He brought his daughter Ellery with him again, as he had all week. 19, bright, currently on summer break from Caltech, Ellery had offered to help him during her visit home. She'd never liked seeing him work alone through the night, and though she wasn't officially on payroll, she wore a Halcyon-issued shirt and gloves without complaint. She didn't come for the money. She came because Vernon was her father, and she respected the work he did. While Vernon handled the 8th floor kitchenettes, Ellery took on the executive corridor on 31. The floor was quieter than usual, but pristine. The carpet shimmered faintly under the overhead LEDs, and glass walls sparkled from the morning sun. She cleaned carefully, silently, working backward to avoid leaving footprints. As she polished a glass table in one of the executive lounges, a sudden voice snapped behind her, sharp and disgusted. "What are you doing here?" Ellery turned to find a tall man in a navy suit, jaw clenched, face flushed. She didn't recognize him immediately, but his badge read Regional Accounts Director. "Cleaning, sir," she said calmly. "This is a secure floor," he barked. "You shouldn't be up here wandering around like you own the place." "I have clearance for today," she replied, holding up her temporary pass. "My father, I don't care who your father is," he interrupted. "This isn't a daycare. This floor isn't for the help to hang out and pretend to be staff." Ellery's face stayed neutral, but her eyes darkened. "I'm not hanging out. I'm working." "I doubt it," the man sneered. "I've been here all week and haven't seen you once. Where's your supervisor?" Before Ellery could respond, he yanked his phone from his pocket and started recording her. "Let's just make sure this gets reported properly," he said. "This building is full of breaches these days. Got to keep an eye on security." She took a step back, stunned not by his aggression, but by the implication. Security risk. Unwanted. Invisible until she wasn't. Vernon, hearing the commotion from the stairwell, hurried up the hall and stepped between them. "She's with me, sir. My daughter. She's cleared to help on light duties. We've got manager sign-off." The executive barely glanced at him. "Keep her in the maintenance zones or don't bring her at all. You don't get to flaunt family in the executive space." "We're not flaunting anything," Vernon replied evenly. "She's working. Then clean the staff floors," the man snapped before storming off. Vernon turned to Ellery. Her eyes shimmered, not from fear or sadness, but from something colder. Rage restrained. They returned to work in silence, but the mood was ruined. Later, in the second-floor cafeteria, Ellery stepped in briefly to use the staff sink near the kitchen. A cluster of interns, fresh-faced and loud, stood nearby eating prepackaged sushi and gossiping about the recent shakeups. As she passed with her bucket, one of them whispered, "There goes Halcyon's DI contribution." Another said, louder, "Looks like someone brought their cleaning homework." A third, bolder than the rest, grabbed a nearby toilet brush from a janitor cart and tossed it across the floor to her feet. "You missed a spot, sweetheart," he said. Laughter erupted. Ellery stood frozen, staring at the brush, then at the boy who threw it. He couldn't have been more than 21. His face turned smug when he saw she wasn't speaking. "You can keep it," he added. "Company gift." Behind him, a female intern chuckled, snapping a picture with her phone. "Perfect. For the holiday card." Ellery didn't say a word. She picked up the brush slowly, returned it to the cart, and walked out. Her back was straight, her stride steady. She didn't give them the satisfaction of reacting. But once outside the cafeteria, she stopped. For a full minute, she stood against the wall, jaw clenched, hands shaking. She resumed helping quietly, gathering used rags, refilling sanitizer, wheeling their battered cart down the long, glossy corridors where her reflection shimmered but never felt solid. The next day, she arrived even earlier than her father. Vernon was still parking the van when she stepped into the back maintenance stairwell and made her way up to the 12th floor with the cart. This floor, mostly used for server management and legacy storage, stayed relatively quiet and unoccupied during daylight hours. Ellery liked it. No stairs, no slurs, just the mechanical hum of cooling fans and the faint static of idle terminals. While wiping down the glass doors to one of the outdated labs, she noticed a stack of shredded documents and printouts left in an open-top recycling bin, carelessly half-filled by some junior engineer who probably thought a jam shredder gave him permission to dump confidential logs. Curious and slightly annoyed at the laziness, she glanced at the top page. It wasn't just outdated reports or generic system flowcharts. These were raw debug logs from Halcyon's presentation system, code outputs layered with error trees, IP traces, and network anomalies highlighted in red and yellow. Ellery blinked, then squinted. A single line of shell command caught her eye. It was formatted as a maintenance override, the same kind of packet her father told her Laurent Massey had flagged before being escorted out. She knelt down beside the bin and pulled out more pages, careful to keep them in order. Line after line showed evidence of system intrusion, anonymous root access requests hidden in redundancy loops, exact byte offsets that indicated port 8051 vulnerabilities, and most glaring of all, a malformed login entry that somehow reset itself and recursively deleted log entries every 13.2 seconds. It wasn't just sloppy code. It was a deliberate backdoor, cleverly disguised as part of an internal diagnostic protocol. And whoever had reviewed this data had tried to bury it, literally and figuratively. Ellery's heart raced. She looked around to confirm no one was watching. The hallway was still empty. She took the stack to the janitor's supply room, locked the door behind her, and sat cross-legged on the tile floor with the papers spread out in front of her. She pulled out her phone, snapped quick reference photos, then reached into her pocket and removed a folded napkin from her lunch. On the back, she began scribbling, not just notes, but a full diagnostic patch, a new validation layer that would override the recursive deletion and restore blocked error logs. She diagrammed the function call structure, wrote pseudocode to rebuild the shell permissions, and sketched a simplified logic gate that could be inserted as a middle filter to trap any traffic attempting to execute admin commands through masked maintenance tags. She worked fast. Her handwriting, sharp and meticulous, flowed with the rhythm of someone who didn't need to think about syntax, someone who understood the architecture intuitively. An hour passed without her realizing. When Vernon called her phone, she jumped slightly, then gathered the notes and slid the napkin between 2 pages of the cleaned-up logs. Down the hall, she passed a frosted glass wall bearing the words Research and Engineering, Internal Feedback Division. Outside the door stood a small steel box bolted to the wall, labeled in bold black text. Suggestions engineers only. No custodial jokes. She stared at it for a moment. The label wasn't clever. It was a warning, and she understood it was never meant for someone like her. She slipped the folded napkin and 2 pages of annotated logs into the box anyway. Then she walked away. The next morning, nothing seemed different. Vernon handed her the same cart. They rode the same elevator. The same employees ignored them with the same practiced indifference. But Ellery's chest carried a low hum of expectation, a whisper of possibility she refused to extinguish. She didn't tell her father, not because she feared his reaction, but because she didn't want him to hope. Not yet, not after all they'd seen. That night, long after she and Vernon had gone home, 2 junior engineers from the Internal Feedback Division opened the suggestions box to log the weekly entries. Usually, it was a few sarcastic notes, a printout of a meme, and once even a rubber chicken. But this time, they found something different. a napkin with tightly written functions, and a log trace breakdown that matched none of their records. At first, they laughed. Then, as they traced the logic on screen, the room quieted. One of them called his supervisor. An hour later, the lead engineer was there, reviewing the functions line by line, realization spreading across his face. The code worked. Not just worked, it was elegant, intuitive. It filled the exact security gap that had crashed their system days ago. No scheduled maintenance windows. It simply happened, like an invisible hand had swept through the server architecture and untangled a web that no one else had even fully mapped. From the 11th floor down to the lowest tier of the data stacks, everything was functioning with a precision that hadn't been seen since before the investor demo crash. Load times dropped. The firewall recompiled itself with new validation parameters. External ping floods that had previously slipped through unnoticed were now being flagged and stopped mid-process. To the average employee, it was a technical miracle. To the developers in the internal feedback division, it was an unexplained anomaly that demanded investigation. At 8:37 a.m., Chief Technology Officer Everett Meyer stood in the center of the Systems Operations Command Room, arms crossed, face set like concrete. The man had a reputation for patience under pressure, but this was something else entirely. Everett had spent 2 nights in that building since the crash, reviewing line after line of system logs, attending closed-door meetings with Charlene Dunn, and deflecting mounting questions from senior partners who wanted heads to roll and answers served on silver platters. Now the system was fixed, and no one could explain how. The log showed a ghost update, a patch installed under a generic process name, time-stamped just after midnight, inserted between routine auto backups. No signature, no author, no admin session trails, just code. Effective, elegant, invisible code. Everett knew every engineer on staff, every personality, every fingerprint of logic they left in the systems they touched. This didn't belong to any of them. He called an emergency meeting, and within 30 minutes, every engineer on the infrastructure team stood silently around the conference table, while Everett projected the mystery patch on the main screen. "Does this belong to anyone?" he asked flatly. No one moved. "You're not in trouble. I just want to know who fixed what none of you could figure out for the past 3 days." Still silence. Some of the junior developers looked genuinely confused. Others glanced sideways at their peers, as if waiting for someone to take credit. Everett zoomed into the annotated segment, the new permission trap that filtered masked root attempts, the adjusted loop structure that caught recursive shell commands before they cascaded, and the signature trigger delay that queued error logs for safe retention. It was brilliant, minimalist but robust, defensive without being paranoid. "You're telling me this appeared out of nowhere?" Everett asked again. "That none of you even knew it existed until you saw the system performance reports this morning?" A few hesitant nods. "Then explain to me how a non-authenticated user installed it on our central stack without tripping a single lockdown protocol." He clicked his remote again, opening the attached metadata. These changes were scripted in plaintext on a Linux instance in DevBox 17. That instance isn't assigned to any of you. In fact, it hasn't been logged into officially in 3 months. A murmur spread through the room. Everett looked up, eyes scanning the crowd. "So, who the hell has been working off that box?" A junior lead raised his hand slowly. "That terminal's in the old storage suite. We use it for recycling outdated logs and running archive compressions." "So you're telling me a ghost workstation submitted the most important system patch since this company was founded?" Everett said. "And no one noticed?" Another silence. Frustrated but curious, Everett dismissed the meeting and ordered a full log trace from IT security. By noon, he was sitting in his office with a tablet, scrolling through surveillance footage linked to DevBox 17's last activity. The video quality was grainy, but clear enough. At 11:12 p.m., the previous night, a young woman in janitorial overalls entered the storage suite, locked the door behind her, and sat at the desk. She wasn't one of the developers. She wasn't even on the technical staff. The timestamp showed she remained inside for over an hour. The workstation's camera, previously disabled, had no footage. But the timing matched. Everett forwarded the clip to HR. "Who is she?" he typed. The response came 15 minutes later. Ellery West, temporary clearance. Daughter of Vernon West, night janitor. Not an employee. Everett stared at the name, then back at the clip, then at the patch. "Get me Vernon," he typed. Now, downstairs, Vernon had just finished mopping the second-floor break room when a suited HR staffer approached with 2 security officers. The janitor straightened slowly, wiping his palms on his uniform. He wasn't afraid, he was tired. Tired of assuming that any moment of quiet would be interrupted by another humiliation. The woman handed him a sealed letter. "CTO, Meyer would like a word." Immediately, Vernon followed without protest, and when he entered Everett's office 10 minutes later, he saw the video already playing in a loop on the monitor. Ellery hunched over the desk, deep in focus. The napkin, the printouts, the typing. "That's my daughter," Vernon said quietly. "She helps me sometimes. She's not hurting anything." Everett waved a hand. "Relax, Vernon. I'm not here to reprimand you. I'm here because your daughter may have just saved this company." Vernon blinked. "Excuse me." "She wrote this," Everett said, pointing to the patch file now displayed in full-screen code view. "We traced the handwriting from the original submission in the suggestion box. Engineering verified it against janitorial logbooks she signed. She did this. And if she did, then I need to meet her. Immediately." Vernon hesitated, unsure whether this was another setup or something real. Then he nodded. "She's back at our apartment, off Michigan and 31st. I'll call her." "No," Everett said, standing. "We'll go together." The meeting had no name. Inside sat 3 vice presidents, the company's legal director, 2 compliance officers, and CTO Everett Meyer, all facing an empty chair across the table. On the far wall, a display showed surveillance stills and snippets of a file folder labeled Unauthorized Access DevBox 17. At precisely 8:03 a.m., Vernon West stepped through the door with Ellery beside him. Her hair was tied back, her face unreadable. She wore no badge, no ID, just a plain collared shirt and dark jeans. Her eyes moved carefully across the room, measuring each gaze that landed on her like a searchlight. Everett motioned to the seat. "Miss West, thank you for coming. Please have a seat." Vernon moved to follow her, but one of the compliance officers gently placed a hand on his arm. "We'll need to speak with your daughter privately." Ellery nodded to her father without hesitation, then stepped into the room alone. The door closed. She sat down across from a panel of authority figures who all regarded her not with curiosity, but suspicion. The legal director, a thin man with a dry voice, began the questioning. "Miss West, you've been recorded entering a restricted workstation last used for deprecated systems testing. Do you deny this?" "No," she replied. "I used the dev box." "And are you aware that this constitutes unauthorized access under company policy?" "There was no security lock on the terminal," she said evenly. "It wasn't password protected. The room wasn't marked restricted, and I didn't remove anything." "But you did submit changes to our core security infrastructure," the VP of Engineering cut in, eyes narrowing. "Or are you suggesting your napkin just materialized in our suggestion box by divine code intervention?" Ellery's voice didn't rise. She didn't flinch. "I found discarded logs, vulnerability traces that matched what I had studied at Caltech. The breach vectors were familiar. I applied a known solution, modified for Halcyon's infrastructure." That name, Caltech, hung in the air for a beat. The room shifted subtly. A few eyebrows rose. Everett leaned forward. "You studied cybersecurity there?" "Applied mathematics with a specialization in systems architecture," she replied. "My thesis focused on recursive fault recovery in multi-layered server environments. One of my algorithms was later adopted by a DARPA-sponsored prototype for self-healing network mesh. You can find the white paper online, Resilient Shell Reinforcement via Recursive Error Gate Logic." The room fell into brief silence. No one had expected her to speak like this. Not from a janitor's daughter. Not from a girl they had mistaken for invisible. The VP of Legal opened a tablet and began typing furiously. The compliance officer blinked. "And you applied this background while cleaning our floors?" "No," she said. "I applied it because no one else was fixing the problem, and because your company left confidential logs unshredded in an open recycling bin." "Why didn't you identify yourself?" someone asked. "Why not submit it under your name?" Ellery's answer came without pause. "Because you had a sign above the box that said no custodial jokes. Because my father was yelled at for walking through the executive hallway. Because your interns threw a toilet brush at me and called it a gift. I've learned that in places like this, people like me are only allowed to speak when spoken to, and only if we're holding a mop." The air grew colder. Charlene Dunn, who had arrived late, entered the room just as Ellery finished that sentence. She didn't sit. She stood against the wall, arms folded, eyes locked on the young woman in front of her. "You're telling us you single-handedly repaired what our entire engineering team failed to identify in a week?" "I'm telling you I saw the breach, knew how to close it, and did it," Ellery replied. "Your team's failure is not my burden. It's their ceiling." Everett stood then. He walked to the wall, tapped the monitor, and brought up a diagram. Ellery's original napkin drawing, now digitized and expanded, showing each logic gate and patch function in perfect form. "This work," he said quietly, "matches the DARPA structure she referenced. And it works. We ran the diagnostics twice. The patch is now hard-coded into our firewall. Without it, we'd be losing millions in live server instability." Charlene's jaw tensed. "So what now? We hire her? Give her a medal?" "She broke protocol. She saved us," Everett said. "And she did it while being treated like she didn't belong in the building." "It's not that simple," Charlene replied. "She's not an employee. She's not even on a formal internship. There are channels, legal liabilities." "I don't care about liabilities," Everett said. "I care that our system works. I care that someone solved a problem we all failed to solve. That earns her a seat at this table. Period." Ellery stood then, eyes still calm, but firm. "I didn't come here for a job," she said. "I came because you dragged me in under the assumption that I vandalized your building. You wanted to discipline me, not recognize me. Let's be honest about that." "Then why did you help?" one executive asked. "Because the people you humiliate are the ones most invested in keeping the building from falling down," she answered. "Because I watched my father mop floors while engineers laughed about DEI hires. Because someone needed to do something right for once." For the first time in the entire interrogation, silence shifted from confrontation to reflection. No one spoke. Even Charlene's arms dropped slightly, her face unreadable. Everett exhaled, slow and measured. "Miss West, would you allow us to extend a formal offer? On your terms, not ours." Ellery looked him in the eye. "Not unless you make room for more like me. I won't be a symbol. I'll be part of a solution, a program, scholarships, equity internships. You want me to work here?" CTO Everett Meyer moved swiftly. He ordered Ellery's temporary credentials upgraded to full guest access under an executive invitation. He didn't ask Charlene Dunn's permission, nor did he wait for board approval. He understood that bureaucracy could wait, but integrity could not. Within hours, Ellery received a new badge, her name printed clearly, attached to a lanyard that now opened doors meant for architects, not janitors. She entered the main lab not as a trespasser, but as a guest of the man responsible for every system in the building. While she worked beside senior engineers, who now watched her every move with a mixture of awe and quiet discomfort, Everett initiated a deeper audit. He wanted to know how someone like Ellery, brilliant, credentialed, and solution-focused, had never once appeared in their internship pipeline, mentorship list, or junior recruitment drives. That inquiry led him to human resources, and then to something far worse. Inside a locked HR database folder labeled Archive, Internship/Cycle be closed applications, Everett found an entry marked with Ellery's full name and Caltech transcript. The file had been submitted 6 months ago. It included glowing letters of recommendation, a patent pending for a security protocol she developed in her sophomore year, and a customized cover letter expressing a deep interest in Halcyon's infrastructure design. It had been marked rejected. No interview, no contact, just one comment highlighted in the administrative notes field, entered by none other than Charlene Dunn. The text read, "Overqualified and under-culturally aligned. Not a good fit for Halcyon's executive environment." That phrase stopped Everett cold. Under-culturally aligned. He stared at it for nearly a minute, jaw clenched. He printed the file, signed his name at the bottom, and slid it into a folder. Then he made a call. "Bring Laurent Massey to HQ. I want him here tomorrow." Across town, Laurent Massey answered the phone not with suspicion, but with silence. The voice on the other end didn't apologize. It didn't grovel. It simply asked him to return, not as a favor, not under charity, but as a necessity. Laurent said nothing for several long seconds. Then he said yes. When he stepped into the Halcyon lobby the next morning, every eye turned. Some recognized him with shame, others with disbelief. He wore no bitterness on his face, only a quiet certainty. He walked past reception like he never left. Everett met him at the elevator, shook his hand firmly, and took him straight to the core development suite, where Ellery waited beside a projection of her patch code, now deeply integrated into the platform's foundation. For 10 minutes, Laurent reviewed every function, every line of syntax, every logic pattern. When he finished, he turned to Everett. "This is genius," he said. "No one on your current team could have done this." "We know," Everett replied. "We also know who rejected her application 6 months ago." Laurent raised an eyebrow. "Charlene. She used a phrase I won't repeat," Everett said. "It was based on culture, not capability." Laurent exhaled slowly, then looked at Ellery. "You remind me of a younger version of myself," he said. "Only smarter." Ellery smiled faintly. "I just didn't know how loud to be." "You were loud in the right way," he replied. "Your work speaks volumes." Everett nodded to Laurent. "There's more. I want your help auditing past project rejections. I have a feeling this wasn't an isolated case." That afternoon, Everett, Ellery, and Laurent sat in the boardroom with a stack of old proposals and flagged feedback forms. Each one bore the same pattern. Diverse candidates with strong credentials quietly sidelined with vague notes, buried under euphemisms like lacking executive polish or too academic, not enough cultural alignment. One file belonged to an Indian-American data scientist who had solved a critical bandwidth throttling issue in a national competition. Another to a Latino systems analyst whose predictive algorithms had been published in 3 journals. Both had applied. Both had been rejected. Both files were marked by Charlene. Laurent leaned back in his chair, the weight of it settling over him. "They didn't just ignore talent," he said. "They structurally suppressed it." Everett's face remained still. "And we let them. We all did. Every approval signed blindly. Every unchecked box. That ends now." Meanwhile, Charlene's office remained closed. She had been informed of the review, but had not yet been called to answer for it. Word began spreading across Halcyon's floors. Quietly, then loudly. The file's cover page bore no threat, only a headline in plain font. Documented structural bias and malicious negligence in executive operations. A case for accountability. Within an hour of receiving it, the board scheduled an emergency session behind closed doors on the 36th floor. No one smiled as they entered. No one joked about it being just another corporate headache. This time, the gravity was visible in every frown, every stiffened gait, every whispered discussion before the elevator doors closed. CEO Martin Kellett was not informed beforehand. He entered the building as usual that morning, dressed in a $1,000 suit, sipping espresso, greeting subordinates with empty charm. When the receptionist informed him that the board had convened without him, his smile faltered for the first time in weeks. "Without me?" he asked. "I wasn't notified of any session." "They've requested your presence immediately," the receptionist replied. "No assistant. Just you." Confused but trying to maintain composure, Martin rode the elevator in silence. On the 36th floor, he stepped into the boardroom and froze. Every seat was filled. Everett sat at the end of the table, alongside the general counsel. At the center was board chairwoman Letitia Grant, eyes steady, hands folded, voice calm. "Martin, take a seat." He did, but not before scanning the room for familiar allies. Charlene was absent. That alone made his throat tighten. Letitia spoke without flourish. "We've reviewed the whistleblower packet submitted by Mr. Massey and corroborated by Mr. Meyer. The evidence is thorough and troubling. It includes documents bearing your approval, recordings that suggest racial hostility, and a pattern of hiring discrimination masked as strategic alignment." Martin opened his mouth, but Letitia raised her hand. "Before you speak, be advised that this session is recorded. Counsel is present. Your participation is voluntary. However, the board has already voted." Martin's face drained. "You voted." "Unanimously," Letitia said. "Effective immediately, you are removed as Chief Executive Officer of Halcyon Dynamics. Your security credentials are revoked. You will be escorted off the premises after this meeting. Your severance is suspended pending the outcome of legal investigations." "This is absurd," Martin snapped, his voice rising. "You're taking the word of a janitor's daughter and a disgraced engineer over me? I built this company." Everett leaned forward, calm but resolute. "And in doing so, you built a structure that denied opportunity, silenced dissent, and punished innovation when it came from the wrong mouths. That's not leadership. That's tyranny. You think this won't blow over?" Martin barked. "You think the market cares about this woke theater?" Letitia pressed a button. The wall monitor behind her lit up with a headline already going viral. "Halcyon CEO accused of discriminatory hiring practices, whistleblower reveals years of racial bias." Beneath it, clips played from a leaked video recorded in the executive break room. Martin laughing with Charlene, mocking DI hires, using phrases like diversity fluff and equity cost. Another clip showed Charlene dismissing LaRon Massey's warnings, saying, "Let the system crash if it has to. Better that than overreacting to some junior panic." Martin's jaw tightened. "You recorded private conversations?" "No," Everett said. "One of your own interns did. He uploaded it after seeing what you did to Ellery West. Seems he had more integrity than most people in this room ever realized." The door opened. 2 uniformed security officers stepped in. Martin rose, defiant. "This isn't over. You think replacing me with some diversity mascot will save you?" Letitia stood too, face stone. "We're not replacing you. We're rebuilding the foundation. And people like you are the cracks." Martin was let out without resistance, though his eyes flared with quiet rage. Downstairs, whispers grew. Employees refreshed social feeds, saw the trending tags. #Halcyon exposed. #equity reclaimed. #listen to Ellery. By midday, several media outlets had picked up the story. Former interns began sharing anonymous accounts of similar experiences. Rejected applications, hostile interviews, silence after interviews abruptly cut short. At 2 p.m., Charlene Dunn was summoned. She arrived in a black blouse and a practiced poker face. But even she couldn't hide her unease when she saw Everett sitting beside 3 HR leads and Halcyon's compliance director. "Charlene," Everett began, "you are being placed on immediate administrative leave pending a full internal investigation into hiring discrimination and the deliberate suppression of talent. This includes your written remarks on applicant profiles, most notably the phrase, under-culturally aligned." "I was protecting the company's cultural integrity," Charlene replied, voice sharp but measured. "Some people just don't fit here." "No, Charlene," Everett said. "You were protecting your comfort. And in doing so, you denied this company its future." "I followed protocol," she said. "You followed bias." Letitia's voice interrupted from the screen, where she appeared via remote video. "You're terminated, effective immediately. Your remarks have already leaked to the press. We've confirmed at least 14 qualified candidates whose applications you obstructed with racially coded language." "I want my lawyer," Charlene said. "You'll need more than that," Letitia replied. "You'll need to explain to the world why someone with national-level credentials, who submitted a fix that saved our infrastructure, was cleaning toilets while you passed over her for a junior college intern who flunked 2 logic assessments. That evening, Ellery sat quietly in the same supply room where she had once scribbled her patch on a napkin. She didn't say much, even as texts and messages flooded in from strangers thanking her, praising her, asking her to speak publicly. She just looked at her father, who entered the room still wearing his janitor's uniform. He didn't speak either. He just walked over, placed his calloused hand on her shoulder, and said, "They finally see what I've always seen." In the weeks that followed the downfall of Halcyon's top brass, the company's headquarters resembled less a fortress of power and more a hub of silent transformation. The marble floors still gleamed, the glass offices still shimmered under the noon sun, and the branding remained as pristine as ever, but the names on the office doors had changed. Gone were the ghostly echo chambers where dismissive chuckles followed diversity initiatives, where dismissals were quietly signed and resumes discarded under coded remarks. In their place came open calls, roundtables, and a pulse that began to beat not just with innovation, but with intention. At the heart of this new rhythm stood Ellery West, still young, still soft-spoken, but now impossible to overlook. A week after the removals, she stood once more in the boardroom, not as a suspect, not as a curiosity, but as the centerpiece of a proposal. Everett Meyer had called her in with a formal offer, a leadership track position in systems development, immediate access to research budgets, and her own team. She had read the document twice, scanned the benefits, nodded politely, then placed it face down on the table. "I'll take it," she said, "but under one condition." Everett blinked. "Go on." "I want a program," she continued. "Not just a scholarship or a panel. I want an institutional commitment. I want Halcyon to create a funded, independent pipeline for underrepresented students in tech. I want mentorship, apprenticeships, embedded learning tracks. I want real seats at the table for people who'd never be invited otherwise." "You want a DEI reboot?" Everett asked. "No," she said. "I want justice woven into the foundation. I want talent lifted, not tolerated. I want us to stop confusing access with charity. You build that with me, and I'll build this company's future." Everett nodded once. Done. And he meant it. Within 4 months, the Halcyon Equity Lab launched with Ellery as its founding director. By the end of the year, they had onboarded 30 students from public schools, community colleges, and underserved neighborhoods into intensive technical boot camps. Halcyon engineers rotated through as mentors. LaRon Massey was named the program's senior advisor. Vernon West, once relegated to nighttime obscurity, now oversaw facilities training for incoming support staff, each of whom received a stipend, technical orientation, and guaranteed paths to certification. What began as a crisis transformed into a blueprint. Other companies took note. Journalists followed the story, not for scandal, but for inspiration. And for the first time, Ellery found herself the subject of attention she had never sought. Keynote speaker invitations, interview requests, even offers to publish her story. She accepted none of the vanity. She focused on the work. But she never forgot. Not the cafeteria laughter. Not the brush tossed at her feet. Not the silence of bystanders. She carried it, not as a wound, but as fuel. 1 year later, on a bright spring afternoon, the Halcyon Equity Lab hosted its first public demonstration event at a community center on the city's west side. The air buzzed with anticipation as students presented their final projects: apps to streamline school food distribution, security protocols to protect online tutoring data, real-time urban mobility platforms coded by hands that had once believed such rooms were out of reach. Ellery stood quietly at the back of the room, observing. Her eyes tracked each student as they explained their code with passion, their posture upright with pride. A gentle applause broke out as one presentation wrapped. Ellery clapped too, then turned and saw him. Martin Kellett. He stood just inside the doorway, wearing plain clothes and no badge, a posture that seemed equal parts humility and hesitation. His once steely eyes were now clouded, his once pristine hair a bit unruly, and the practiced grin replaced with something far more human. He held nothing but a folded flyer, one of the promotional prints for the event distributed across the city. For a second, Neither moved. Then Ellery walked toward him, slow, deliberate. He didn't speak. He waited. When she reached him, he opened his mouth, but she raised a hand, not to stop him, but to ground the moment. She reached to a nearby table, grabbed a clipboard and pen, and held them out to him. "Start by listening," she said. He blinked, then took the clipboard. On it, a sign-up sheet for volunteers. The first column read name, the second skill, the third willing to learn. Martin read it once, then looked at her. "I don't know what I can offer," he admitted. "That's not what this is about," Ellery replied. "It's about what you're willing to build." He nodded slowly, then signed his name. Vernon, from across the room, watched the exchange with a silent smile. He didn't need to interrupt. He knew redemption didn't come through speeches or ceremonies. It came through humility and labor. As the afternoon unfolded, Martin quietly moved through the room, listening to students, asking questions, staying to the edges, but never slipping out the door. And for once, he wasn't the most important man in the room. He wasn't even the most visible. He was simply a man trying to learn what he had once refused to see. And that was enough. Outside, the sky was wide and clear, and the city hummed with its usual noise. But inside that center, justice wasn't just an idea. It was active, ongoing, built from code and courage, mistakes and forgiveness, humility and design. Ellery stood near the back, clipboard in hand, a new group forming around her. Students, interns, former skeptics, now believers. The janitor's daughter was no longer a story of overcoming. She was a story of reshaping, of teaching the system how to see value where it had once seen none. And in that, the greatest plot twist wasn't the downfall of the corrupt. It was the rebirth of what they had tried to bury. Not revenge, not retribution, just restoration. Just people finally seen, finally heard, finally leading. Not in spite of the floor they came from, but because of it. The end. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more powerful narratives like it, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What did you think about the plot twist when Ellery finally stood up to the system? Did any part of the story surprise or move you? Let me know in the comments below. Also, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments. It's always exciting to see where our stories are reaching. Let's talk about justice, redemption, and what this story meant to you.